State Capitol Museum in Olympia, and this is Derek Valley, who's the director of the museum. Hi, Derek. How are you?
Hi, welcome.
Hello.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to Lacey Museum. I'm Andrea Taylor, the curator. Come on in.
As you know, the Medicine Creek Council and the treaty were the decisive turning point of the mid-19th century.
And welcome to the DuPont Museum.
Here we are at one of the most historic sites in Washington State, the 1843 Fort Nisqually site in DuPont, Washington.
Come on in. Welcome to Fort Nisqually.
Follow along. I'll show you a little of the fort. Come in.
Good day, sir.
Hello.
Ken?
Hi.
Hi,
Nice to
good
see you again.
Good to see you again. Welcome to coming to Fort Silicon today.
We're here at Steilacoom on the west bank of the Puget Sound, not too far from Fort Steilacoom.
Here is the church that was mentioned at Fort Steilacoom as being the church that was at Fort Steilacoom, paid for by the subscriptions of the soldiers and people there. It was moved here to Steilacoom after the fort closed.
Not far from the Catholic Church and overlooking Puget Sound again is the Nathaniel Orr Home.
We're here at the Fort Lewis Military Museum, and we're meeting Alan Archambault, who is the director of this museum, and he's going to give us a tour of some of the really neat items and artifacts they have here.
Dave and Dandy. These are Ezra Meeker's oxen that he took to the East Coast in 1906, retracing his route of 1852. Ezra was, of course, the earliest settler in this area. And Dave made the trip all the way. Dandy was a replacement oxen after the initial oxen had passed away. Beyond retracing the trail in 1906, Ezra also traveled the route by automobile and by airplane later on.
Here we are on the 5th floor, and we found some artifacts belonging to Isaac Stevens, first territorial governor of Washington. And Karen, could you point out some of these?
Sure. A really nice item we have over here is a buckskin coat that was given to Isaac Stevens by a Nez Perce chief as a token of peace when he came through the Nez Perce territory. We also have a pair of binoculars that were used by Isaac Stevens on his first military surveying route out here, a barometer owned by Stevens, a pair of really fancy military epaulets that went on Stevens' military uniform, and we also have a sword that was used by him. And as Roger mentioned, he was the first territorial governor, but he started out in the Northwest on a surveying expedition, which was really mapping the territory that was first opened up by Lewis and Clark on their Corps of Discovery. And one of the things we want to go and see now is the Washington State Historical Society Research Center, which is located across town, and they have pulled some wonderful items for us to go and see. So let's take a look out there.
Here we are at the Washington State Historical Society Research Room, and we're going to go in and look at some of the artifacts that we had seen during the tour.
We're here in a special collections room at the Washington State Historical Society Research Center, and one of the very special items they brought out for us today is the first flag that was made in Washington Territory. This flag was made by John R. Jackson and his wife Matilda and several of their neighbors, including the McDonalds and the Drews and people from the area. It was made in 1853, which is when Washington was separated out to become a territory from Oregon Territory. John R. Jackson sent for material from San Francisco, and when it arrived in Washington Territory, they sewed it into this flag. It only has 12 stars. Actually, it has more than that. It has 13 stars. And they actually ran out of material, so it only has 8 stripes rather than 13 as it would have been. But this was a very historic flag and was flown at the first 4th of July celebration at the Jackson Courthouse. This is a portrait of Chief Leshai, who was from the Nisqually tribe. And this is a portrait that was painted in 1894 by an artist named Coombs. This is a sketch made by Edmund T. Coleman, who was an artist in the 1860s and 1870s. This particular sketch of Mount Rainier from Nisqually Plain was first done as a pencil sketch, and this particular version we're looking at is one done in an ink wash over silk, which is pretty unusual, and it was done around 1870. The Research Center has some great photos in their collection, and we're going to look at a few here that pertain to the Cowlitz Trail. The first is a sketch made by an artist named Sohan, and he did a sketch as Fort Vancouver appeared in 1855. And you can see the military and also the Hudson's Bay buildings there. And then moving north along the trail, we would come up to the old town of Monticello, which of course no longer exists. It was wiped out by a flood. But this is Harry Darby Huntington's house, and he was really the founder of Monticello and had a hotel, a stage stop, and was the mover and shaker in Monticello in the old days. And then farther up the Cowlitz River, we have a few photos of the old Cowlitz Landing. And these pictures are taken from the north bank looking south. And we don't know the dates of these photos, perhaps as late as the 1940s, but they do show the river as it was after the river had changed course. And finally, we have a sketch done in 1857 of Fort Steilacoom by an artist named James Alden, and it obviously shows Mount Rainier.
This is a very early original map, kind of a plat map showing the John R. Jackson area where he had his courthouse and the area around that. This was done by the Surveyor General's office and entered at Oregon City on the 11th of February 1854. And all of this area in through here, south of the Jackson Courthouse, was the Puget Sound Agricultural Company, which was part of the area near the mission and so on that we have visited.
Hi, I'm Crooks, historian at the Lacey Museum.
And my name's Mike Iyall. I'm with the Cowlitz Indian Tribe. I'm a tribal councilman since 1974.
And one of the most interesting things is the ties that interweave the Cowlitz people and the Hudson's Bay Company.
Yeah, we have, our lore actually tells us that when the Bay Company was at Fort Astoria, then Fort George, our chief Skanewa went down to the fort and asked them to relocate the trading post closer to his home. And that trading post that was relocated would be later known as Fort Vancouver.
Yeah, the Cowlitz was a key, that whole corridor was a key way for fur trading into what is now Western Washington, and it was blocked for a long time because of the disagreement between the Iroquois Indians that worked with the Northwest Company and the Cowlitz. But it was finally unlocked when Simon Plamondon came through about 1820.
Yeah, that was the result of, that ended up in a marriage between one of Skanewa's daughters and Simon Plamondon, and we still have tribal members bearing the Plamondon name today. We just lost a fellow recently, a distinguished cartographer by the name of Martin Plamondon, who did Lewis and Clark works.
Yeah, the interesting thing is Plamondon lived from 1800 to 1900, and so he saw the whole change for the Cowlitz people and for the whole Cowlitz corridor, Cowlitz Trail. And there's so many descendants. Chief Skinewa also, the manner of his death is interesting, showing the close ties between the Hudson's Bay Company and the Cowlitz, because he was carrying a letter for the company coming down from Fort Langley when he was murdered.
Oh yeah, we were reviewing that in the Fort Langley journals just the other day. My brother and I were discussing it, and when you read the text, there's mention of an infant child that went with them when they went up to Fort Langley to establish a trading post there. And we believe now that that infant child may have been my great-grandfather, Iyall, who's our family namesake. It just, you know, we don't have any proof yet, but it's just a likelihood that there was an infant child with his father.
And well, from the stories I've heard, Skinewa, some children, at least one child and his wife, were captured by the Native Americans that killed Skinewa, and the Hudson's Bay Company ransomed them. And they considered it a great loss because Skinewa was one of the chiefs that really opened up this whole area. He was one of the 3 most powerful chiefs in Western Washington, what is now Western Washington, according to George Simpson.
Yeah, Governor Simpson said that 3 men controlled the trade on the Columbia: Concomly, the Chinook chief at the mouth of the river, and Casino, or Casino as he's commonly known, controlled the trade in what is now modern-day Kalama, and then Skinewa controlled the balance of the Columbia River. And for Governor Simpson to have said that is significant because Lord Simpson was in charge of Fort Spokane and Fort Okanagan as well. So he was aware of the significance of what he was saying.
Because of the ties that developed between the Hudson's Bay Company and the Cowlitz people, the Cowlitz Trail became a key route for the company, going up from Fort Vancouver on the Columbia River, up to Cowlitz Farm, near present-day Toledo, and right up to Fort Nisqually, near Squalichu Creek, and what is now DuPont, Washington. But I think the whole concept is that it was a Native American trail for thousands of years, then it became a Hudson's Bay Company trail.
Oh yeah, when I was just recently in South Dakota, and the dentalum shells that come from the northern Vancouver Island and the Queen Charlottes have a unique characteristic. They have a spiral flute on them, and those dentalum shells were on garments in South Dakota, and that dentalum only comes from one place in the whole world. So we know that at least indirectly, the dentalum shells that came down the Cowlitz Trade Corridor made it as far as South Dakota.
I think what changed the balance of power along the Cowlitz Trail was the disease that came in the 1830s, particularly brought in from Europe, and with the Euro-Americans coming in, that simply wiped out much of the Cowlitz tribe. And Hudson's Bay Company officials were horrified by the high death rates among the villages.
Yeah, I was discussing that with the author Robert Boyd, why some of our family members happened to survive. And I had this pet theory that the children of chiefs married other chiefs and therefore had a much broader gene pool, and Robert Boyd told me no, it was quinine. But it was that close business relationship that Skinewa had with the Bay Company that let his family members have access to quinine. Because at that same time, Europeans that didn't have access to quinine here in Western Washington perished.
And what's interesting is because of the ties between the Cowlitz Indians and the workers for the Hudson's Bay Company, they developed a Métis or mixed blood group of descendants that I think played a key role. Many of them were French Canadian and Native American and Cowlitz.
Oh yeah, well, you know, we still have names like Plamondon and Bouchard in the tribe, and interestingly enough, it's never. I think that the people are an important part of the tribe. It's like they were never not there, and I think that it kind of reflects a tradition to where the people, the Cowlitz people, and probably most of the Native Americans were so adaptable that when change came, it didn't derail them. They just wove it right into the fabric, and it went on smoothly. I guess an example would be the trade language jargon originally was mostly Nootka, and by the mid 1800s, it had French, Spanish, and English words woven right in it.
I guess the great crisis came in the 1850s with the treaties being made. Some were successful councils, some were not successful councils. And then the war that broke out after that is kind of a tragic irony that the Cowlitz people were neutral, or actually some fought with the American settlers as scouts, and yet they still did not receive a reservation.
Yeah, well, it ended up we sided with the wrong bunch. We sided with the United States, and when the Indian Wars were over, the Army wanted to force us onto reservations. They wanted to disarm us and go live on a reservation with people we had just defeated. And our people were still strong enough at that time that we said, no, we won't do that. And so we resisted treaties, and we resisted the reservation concept.
And it was also during that 1850s too, because of the treaty between the United States and Great Britain, the Hudson's Bay Company was now in American territory, not Air National Territory of Joint Occupation. And so they had their rights now at Cowlitz Farm up at Fort Nisqually. But being pressured by the American settlers, it really decreased what they could do. And eventually they sold their rights and moved up into Canada. But many of the employees decided to stay, and they married into Native American families and American settler families, and there's still a number of descendants in this area.
Oh yeah, I think, personally, I think that, of course, John McLaughlin, if he hadn't quietly rebelled against Lord Simpson's instructions and tolerated the American settlers and quietly gave them food and support, Washington might still be British. I also believe that the Cowlitz, in allowing free access of the trade route on the Cowlitz corridor, I believe that helped make Washington part of the United States as opposed to part of Canada.
And it was a painful transition. I was just recently reading about what happened to Simon Plamondon Jr. and his claim at Cowlitz Landing, and how he lost the claim, and he went back to court years later to get it, but he never really received justice for the land that he lost.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's only now in the last 15, 20 years, we kind of come to the theory that the only time we'll really get justice is when we have enough people that are trained as Indian lawyers, and that means a lot of Indians that have learned the Indian law, because it's a complex area that not all lawyers understand. I believe now that the Washington State Bar is going to require some questions on Indian law, which is kind of surprising that this is a key point of law, and after 100+ years of having the Washington Bar and 100+ years of having Indian law, only now are we going to require it as part of their knowledge.
And another unifying factor that brought the Hudson's Bay Company and the Cowlitz people together would be the Catholic religion, with the mission site set up at near Cowlitz Farm, near Cowlitz Villages, near present-day Toledo. I think St. Francis Xavier Church, as early as 1838, and it was both Cowlitz people and mainly French Canadian, but other Hudson's Bay Company employees that joined the church that kind of brought that to still a very strong presence down in that area.
Oh yeah, my father was Catholic. I think that the Jesuits had a very powerful influence. I currently use the Hudson's Bay Company spelling in my name, Iyall. It's the Scottish spelling, but my great-grandfather used the Jesuit spelling. So, you know, there's a French spelling for our name as well. But, yeah, the Catholic influence was really, you know, strong. We just recently just purchased St. Mary's from the Catholic Church. And I think most of our members still feel a very strong spiritual connection to the St. Mary's property at Toledo.
Yeah. And I guess one thing that united them was both sides were, the sense of ceremony was important. And for the Catholic Church of the 19th century particularly, but even today, and for the Cowlitz people, the sense of ceremony involving spiritual things. And but there was this two cultures, two peoples coming together. And one way I've heard is that the Catholic missionaries, starting in the 1830s, I think they started this about 1842, was the use of the Catholic ladder, which was a visual way of showing through symbols and through marks representing dates the story of the world, from Adam and Eve up to the coming of the missionaries to this area, and in a way making a visual impact in explaining that the concepts of the Catholic Church were, which of course came from Europe.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's interesting. There's some people have never heard of the Catholic ladder, and I showed some history professors about a few months ago at St. Mary's the ladder. I wasn't aware at the time that it was the very first of the Catholic ladders, but it was a visual tool that they used to explain history. We had always relied more on oral history. There was once a written Cowlitz language, but that's long lost now.
And I think another thing that brought them together was a sense of music too. Singing was real important, and I was reading about some of the early missionaries. One of the key things in the very beginning to sing, to teach different religious songs, and knowledge was passed on through music too, and songs.
Sure. Yeah, the only thing I've found is I've been doing some research trying to make family connections, and the one frustration I had with the Catholic Church was that they gave people new names. So because you had a new identity, you were Indian Bob or Indian Mary, and there was no connection as to who Indian Bob was before he became Indian Bob. And because of that, I was a little frustrated that the records, unless we can trace back from the modern era, don't tell us those family connections.
And one thing I probably should also mention is the ties that tied the Hudson's Bay Company and the Cowlitz were both social in the sense that many company employees married Cowlitz Indians and other native tribes, and also business too. When the company came in, they considered Native Americans, including the Cowlitz tribe, as partners, as business partners. And that the work they did in collecting furs and also having a farm at Cowlitz Farm, they depended on native labor. It's a contrast with American settlers that came later, because for them they were recreating the world they knew back on the East Coast and the Midwest. And the native Cowlitz and other people, it really wasn't part of the world they were creating, the American settlers.
No, it gave us a new identity, although when we look back at the Bay Company wishing to establish their trading post at Fort Langley, then, you know, of course they took Skanewa up there. Yeah. And for a while it took me time to realize, well, why would they take Skanewa, a man from Western Washington, up to Canada? Well, I believe that Governor Simpson felt that Skanewa was an influential man that far away from home. And later we have done research, and we believe that Skanewa was a man who had as many as 8 or more wives, because marriages at that time were often for alliances. And one of Skanewa's wives was Cynthia Wanasee. And I believe that Cynthia's family, she was my great-great-grandmother, was the Wakanasi people. And I believe the Wakanasi people, they're listed as Nootkins by Duncan McDougall in the Fort Astoria Journals, which brings us the trade connection up to the northern tip of Vancouver Island. And that explains with the Dentalum shells that I mentioned earlier. So this was just a further sign of a trade alliance that benefited the Nootkins and the Cowlitz.
I guess in conclusion, that the Cowlitz Trail was crucial for American settlers coming in, but that it was crucial also, essential for the operations of the Hudson's Bay Company in this region, and long before them for the Cowlitz people too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
We're back at the Bush House area because there have been some new developments, and we've met someone who owns the property. This is Tony Sexton, and he's going to tell us a little bit about this butternut tree that's behind us and some new unfortunate developments. Tony, what did you find out about the tree?
Well, of course, you folks probably already know that this tree was planted here by George Washington Bush in 1845. And it's a butternut tree. And the reason that the old pioneers and so on planted butternut trees, and specifically would bring it all the way from Missouri out here, is because there is tannic acid in the husk on butternuts to tan hides with. So it was a very valuable tree. And George Bush could trade with the Indians and other settlers and so on the husks off those butternuts. Well, the tree has stood here for almost 150 years and has been looked after quite well by the previous owners. The Paynes took very good care of it when they lived here. I bought this place from them. But unfortunately, the tree has shown some signs of dying. And just recently we have had arborists here from Tumwater, one of them, the last one. And they drilled the tree to check for green wood, and unfortunately there is very little green wood left, just maybe 3 inches on the outside. The inside of the tree is rotten and full of water. And it doesn't mean that the tree has to be cut down, but it's going to take some care, certainly, and probably some drastic pruning. Go ahead.
Well, it's just a good example of one of the reasons that we started this whole project. There are so many things that are fading away, unfortunately. And I see you have some things that you've plowed up that probably were things that belonged to George Bush and family. Could you maybe tell us about
Sure. These articles, there's 5 acres here I've got with the property, and I'm plowing and restoring the fields now. And as I plow these different things up, and in fact my wife found most of these right over here, if you can see under these nut trees, where there was a forge at one time that George Bush had right there. And just little articles that are kind of exciting to find. This is a used, we have a handle on it, and it's for cutting hot metal, you know, like if you're going to cut off a bolt or something and you pound it through to cut metal at a forge. And these are just an old spoon that I plowed up a couple of feet down.
That might have come over the Oregon Trail.
Very well could have. An old railroad spike, and just a lot of things you really don't know what they are. There's a square nail for nailing some of the big logs. This is a real interesting thing. This is for splitting logs, a large log. You'd use a small wedge to open up a crack and then drive this down for big logs, which I'm sure there were some here in 1845. And these things just seem to turn up whenever I'm plowing, and it's kind of exciting actually. Kind of gives you an incentive to go out and plow on a cold day. But the old place is quite historic, and I notice the only structure left here is the new ones, that, like the house and my shop.
Well, here's a picture of one of the buildings you're talking about. Just so happened we had a new camera and we wanted to bring it out here and try the camera out, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, this is probably the last picture ever taken while it was standing, and you have a story about that.
Yes, when I bought the place, I had an electronic gate, entrance gate, to enter the property put up, and to do that, you have to get permission from the fire department. So the captain from the fire department came out to approve my gate, and he said, you know, I know this property because we accidentally burned down the old house and the bush house. And I said, how'd that happen? And he said, we got a call from a landowner, said, look, there's this old house here, and would you like to come burn it down as an exercise? And I'm sure that no one really knew at that time what they were doing. Fire departments felt terrible after the Historic Society called them the next day. And but that's just what happened to the old place. I do plow up pieces of it occasionally.
And you say maybe we can see where that sat, or where you think it's sat?
Right over, well, this is kind of the bushes are blocking us, but just over there, maybe 50 yards or so, just beginning in the field is about where that would have sat, right in that area, or up in there too, by my shop. Now the old house, instead of facing the highway like my house does now, it faced toward the river. And so this place is, I hope, can be kept on a historic setting after I'm gone or moved or whatever, or plowed under.
Well, I think that that property is very fortunate to have someone who cares about it as you do. And thanks so much for giving us this little
You bet.
insight.
Thank you for your interest, and thanks for coming by.
In a nutshell, I became involved in this Cowlitz Trail Project because Roger gave me a call one day and asked if I would help in the video documentary of the Cowlitz Trail as part of the Washington Territorial Sesquicentennial offshoot. My interest in the Cowlitz Trail, however, started earlier. As a member of the Oregon-California Trails Association, we have a very much interest in all the old immigrant roads, including the Cowlitz Trail. I put together a short program as an auditor of the Cowlitz Trail about 10 years ago, and to do that I visited with area historians, with local museums, everything between Fort Vancouver and Fort Nisqually. I discovered soon that most of the Cowlitz Trail signs were no longer there. They'd given way to highway construction, farming, residential construction. Fortunately, the route of the Cowlitz Trail has been preserved on early GLO maps and surveys that were conducted in the mid-1850s. And this GLO map shows the Cowlitz Trail where it begins at Cowlitz Landing. Cowlitz Landing is in the lower part of the picture. John Jackson's homestead was up here further. With that information, I put together a auto tour guide for the Cowlitz Trail. These two photographs show what remained at one time of the Cowlitz Trail in the Grand Mound area. The top left photograph was of the trail as it came through the trees, and it can still be seen. And the reason you can see that is because the thousands of wagons that passed that way in the late 1800s compacted the soil so that little vegetation would grow. The lower right photograph was taken a couple years ago showing the residential development that has replaced what was left of the Cowlitz Trail. The next two photographs are in the same area as the last two. The top left one is as the trail crosses rock prairie just west of Tenino, and the landowner has made sure that this is preserved for future generations. In the lower right picture, we have the Cowlitz Trail as it passes through Lewis and Clark State Park. Being in a state park, we know that its future is going to be preserved. We've talked about Ezra Meeker before, and many of us consider him to be the father of trail preservation. And this photograph is of Ezra Meeker when he was in Tenino in 1906 to dedicate the first of his markers in the state of Washington. Ezra crossed the plains in 1852, settled in the Puyallup area, and became a farmer, first mayor of Puyallup, and he was a historian. At the close of the 19th century, he saw that the trail was disappearing to construction, much as we see it today. He was most concerned, however, about the pioneer sacrifices and that they would soon be forgotten. As a result, when he was 75 years old, he set out with his prairie schooner on a trip to the East Coast to increase public awareness and to provide markers along the route that he traveled many, many years before. Along the way, he solicited donations, sold books and postcards so that the markers could be placed at important parts, including Tenino. A number of years after Ezra traveled east along the Oregon Trail, he founded the Oregon Trail Memorial Association to carry on his dream of marking and remembering the trail. In 1982, the Oregon-California Trails Association was formed to continue Ezra Meeker's, and it's a functioning organization yet today. Our 3,000 members nationwide work closely with federal agencies to mark and map the old trails, and we have produced this video, Saving a Legacy, which sets forth the reasons for that need. At this time, the Cowlitz Trail is not marked with highway signs, and the reason for that is that before it can be done, it's got to be included in the National Historic Trails Act established by Congress, and they're working on that at this present time. And we're optimistic that one day soon that the Cowlitz Trail, as well as the Natchez Pass route to the Puget Sound area, will be included in the National Historic Trails Act, and that we can install highway signs for the benefit of the traveling public.
Thank you, Chuck, for letting us know all about OCTA and some of the plans for the marking of the trail. Since we began this project 3 years ago, several events have happened, and first, sadly, I have to say that we've lost 3 of the people that were very instrumental in helping us do this project. First, Lois Boulette, who did not appear on tape, was a descendant of Simon Plamondon, and she gave us all kinds of information about the first white man who settled north of the Columbia. Then we have lost not only Mary Ann Bigelow, who was the matriarch of the Bigelow family, but also her husband. You may recall the Bigelow house. She gave us an interview. And also we have lost Darrell Hedges, who was the person that you may remember met Ezra Meeker when he came to their school. We're saddened by this, but needed to let you know. Another event that occurred since the beginning of this filming was something that we're very happy that happened. Chief Leschi, who was one of the people that lived along the trail, most of you probably know about, had an exoneration. And this was done in Tacoma at the Washington State Historical Society on December 10th, 2004, when a group of judges, let me just read off who they were. The Honorable Gary L. Alexander, who was Chief Justice of the Washington State Supreme Court, the Honorable Susan Owens, who is also a Justice on the State Supreme Court, the Honorable Robert E. Cox, Chief Judge of the Washington Court of Appeals, Division I, Honorable Karen Seinfeld, Judge Retired of the same group, Honorable Daniel J. Burschauer, who was a judge of the Thurston County Superior Court, the Honorable Teresa Poli, Judge of the Lummi Tribal Court, Gordon Honeywell, and several other former judges actually impaneled themselves for this trial, which is not an official trial, but it brought up whether or not Chief Leschi really was guilty of a murder during the Indian Wars in 1855 and 56. And the judgment was that since this was a war, he was not to be held liable for a murder, even though they didn't go further to prove that he actually didn't do it. There just wasn't any reason to go any farther because he was a member of the tribe that was part of the war. So he was exonerated, and I think all of the history books will show this from this point on. Karen has something additional to tell you. Karen?
Thanks, Roger. One of the things that I had a chance to see after we started filming, unfortunately we didn't capture it on video, was the Cathlapodal Longhouse or Plank House down by Ridgefield, Washington. One of the tribes we didn't get to visit with was the Chinook tribe, but in the meantime they have built a beautiful reproduction long or plank house down on the banks of the Columbia. And if you have a chance to visit the wildlife refuge down in Ridgefield, please go there. The longhouse has been built in the traditional style and it really is a beauty. Another event or series of events that we were involved with because of this video, we're replacing some Meeker markers. Late last summer in 2005, Chuck Hornbuckle happened to mention that 2006 was going to be the 100th anniversary of Ezra Meeker's trip back to retrace and commemorate the Oregon Trail. So I thought, you know, there are two places in Lewis County that Meeker wanted to place markers and they never came through, and that was Chehalis and Clequedo. So just a few weeks ago we managed to get those two stone markers up and it was a great day. We've got several photos that we can show you of unveiling the markers and the crowds that came out to see us dedicate those markers, and we hope that Ezra Meeker is happy that those two markers are finally finished and in place.
You may remember during episode number 1 we gave you a website directly to Secretary of State's website that has a searchable function that allows you to look up anyone you want in early territorial history. At this point, there are almost 6 million names from all over the state. Many of the people that we talked about in our video can be found in the form of censuses and naturalization papers and all kinds of different documents. So you should go to the website that is on the screen. Also, we have put together a slide series of this whole project that's on my website, which is waresearcher.com, and you would be able, by looking at this, to see still shots of how we've actually put this together, and some of the people that were involved, and that are actually not on the video itself. So please feel free to go there. Also, you will find on there quite a few things that relate to what we did on the Cowlitz Trail. And feel free to contact me at any time for any information on that, and that's on the website. Now we'll go to Chuck.
In addition to the websites that Roger told you about, the Oregon California Trail Association has a website. It's www.octa-trails.org. The address shows up on your screen.
There are so many people that we need to thank for helping us do this video. And let me just tell you a couple. All the descendants, we had some 75 descendants of the people that made this trip up the Cowlitz Trail that gave us information and moral support. And of course we had many, many historians, most of them local historians in their area, and it was because of them that we were able to do find as many of the places that we did and have the information that we got. And Karen, did you want to?
Well, we also visited on our trip up from the Columbia River up north to Puget Sound and Tacoma. We also visited practically every museum along the way. We visited parks, state parks, county parks, city parks. We also visited state and regional libraries, and of course the archives that we got information from, most notably the Washington State Archives, which really spearheaded this whole project. Chuck?
As Roger mentioned, there are so many people we need to thank, and it's everybody that participated in this project between Fort Vancouver and Fort Nisqually. You made our 3-year effort a success. As we've seen, the Cowlitz Trail was a Native American trade route, a portage of the Hudson Bay Company, and finally a wagon road for American immigrants. Today, the Cowlitz Trail corridor is a host to an interstate freeway, a railroad, numerous utility lines, and 6 miles up, jumbo jets fly above the Cowlitz Trail.